One of these towns wasn't just bypassed, it was poisoned. One of the most toxic chemicals ever produced, sprayed across the streets for years, and nobody told anyone. By the time the government arrived, it was already too late. Every family evacuated, every building demolished. That town is on this list. But first, you need to understand how these towns existed in the first place, and how one road changed everything. In the summer of 1919, a young Army lieutenant named Dwight Eisenhower joined a military convoy crossing the United States. It took 62 days. Trucks broke down, bridges collapsed, entire stretches of road simply didn't exist. The convoy averaged 5 miles an hour. Eisenhower called the roads impossible. Decades later, as president, he made sure that would never happen again. In 1956, he signed the Federal Aid Highway Act, creating more than 40,000 miles of interstate highways. Smooth, fast, built to bypass towns, not pass through them. And almost overnight, it made Route 66 obsolete. Route 66 had been the lifeline for hundreds of small towns. Gas stations, diners, motels, entire communities built on passing traffic. The interstate took that traffic away. One by one, the exits disappeared. The cars stopped coming, and the towns were left behind. These are 10 of them. Amboy, California. If you've ever seen a photograph of Route 66, chances are you've seen Amboy. Roy's Motel and Cafe, the neon sign, the gas pumps standing in the middle of the Mojave like a mirage you're not sure is real. During Route 66's peak, Amboy was essential. Not charming, essential. There was nothing else for miles in either direction. If you were crossing the desert, you stopped in Amboy, or you risked not making it at all. The town swelled to about 500 people. A school, a church, a post office, all built on the simple economics of geography. Amboy was in the way, and that was enough. Then Interstate 40 opened in the early 1970s, routing traffic 4 miles to the south. 4 miles. Close enough that on a clear night, you could probably see the headlights. But nobody was turning off the interstate to find a gas station they no longer needed. By 2000, 4 people lived in Amboy. 4. And here's where the story takes a turn that only Route 66 could produce. In 2005, a man named Albert Okura, the founder of Juan Pollo, a Southern California chicken restaurant chain, bought the entire town for $435,000. The motel, the cafe, the road, the land, everything. He's been restoring Roy's sign ever since, keeping the lights on. Not because it's profitable, it isn't, but because he believes some things are worth preserving even after the reason for them disappears. Amboy didn't die all at once. It just stopped being on the way to anywhere. 2 Guns, Arizona, sat on the rim of Canyon Diablo, and the name fit. This was never a quaint roadside town. It was a spectacle. A gas station, a trading post, and a zoo full of mountain lions caged up next to the highway to lure travelers off the road. Below the canyon were the Apache Death Caves, the site of a 19th century massacre, later marketed as a tourist attraction. Legends of buried treasure. Paranormal tours. 2 Guns sold danger the way other towns sold postcards. And then there was the murder. Harry 2 Gun Miller, the man who built most of the roadside attractions, was shot by his business partner in a dispute over the property. The violence that made 2 Guns a tourist draw eventually turned inward. When Interstate 40 replaced Route 66 through this stretch of Arizona, it didn't just bypass 2 Guns, it made the entire canyon approach obsolete. No off-ramp, no sign, no reason to turn. Today, the stone walls are crumbling. The mountain lion cages are rusted open and empty. Graffiti covers the entrance to the caves. 2 Guns was always a place built on spectacle. The interstate just found a newer one. CUERVO, New Mexico. Most Route 66 towns were bypassed. The highway went around them, and the traffic followed. CUERVO wasn't bypassed, it was bisected. When Interstate 40 was built through eastern New Mexico, planners routed it directly through CUERVO's center. Not around it, not beside it, through it. The town was cut in 2. Church on one side, church on the other. School on one side, school on the other. Houses separated by lanes of fast-moving traffic. What used to be a single street became a divided landscape of concrete and noise. But here's the cruel part. There's no exit, no off-ramp, no sign that says CUERVO. You drive through what used to be a town at 75 miles an hour with 18-wheelers rushing past on both sides, and you never even realize you're crossing through a place where people still live. Only a handful of people remain, a few homes, a few structures still holding on against time and traffic. They exist in the median of American progress, surrounded by a highway that treats their town as empty space between places that matter more. What's crueler? Being forgotten or being driven through every day by people who don't even know you exist? Ludlow, California. Ludlow sits in the middle of the Mojave Desert. There isn't much to see at first. A few low buildings, faded signs, wind moving across empty ground. But this used to be a stop. During the peak of Route 66, Ludlow is part of a long chain of places that kept people moving. Fuel, water, a place to pause before the desert stretched out again in every direction. There was nothing else for miles. Then Interstate 40 opened nearby. The traffic didn't slow down. It disappeared. What had been a stop became something you passed without noticing. Today, Ludlow feels less like a town and more like a memory of one. Traces of the town still remain, holding their shape against heat and time. The rest has already faded into the landscape. Stand here long enough and you start to understand what changed. Not the desert, not the buildings, just the movement. People stopped coming. And without that movement, there was no reason for Ludlow to stay alive. GLENRIO, Texas, New Mexico. GLENRIO sits on the Texas-New Mexico state line. Not near it, on it. The border runs straight through the town. Depending on which direction you were driving Route 66, you either saw First Motel in Texas or Last Motel in Texas. Same building, same sign. Two different promises, depending on your perspective. If that idea feels familiar, it should. GLENRIO is widely believed to have inspired Radiator Springs, the fictional town in Pixar's Cars. The comparison is almost perfect. A small town built on a busy highway, thriving because people had to pass through it. Then the road changed. In the movie, the town is saved. Someone stops, sees the place for what it is, and the life comes back. GLENRIO didn't get that ending. When Interstate 40 bypassed the town in the mid-1970s, the traffic disappeared. Texas side, New Mexico side, both went quiet at the same time. Businesses closed, buildings emptied. The road kept moving, and the town did not. In 2007, the remains were added to the National Register of Historic Places, not as a living community, but as a reminder of what was left behind. Pixar gave GLENRIO a second chance. The real town never got one. Jericho Gap, Texas. This one isn't a town. It's a stretch of road. And it might be the darkest story on this list, not because of tragedy, but because of intent. Jericho Gap was an 18-mile section of Route 66 between Groom and ALANREED in the Texas Panhandle. In the early years, this part of the road was unpaved. And when it rained, which it did often, the surface turned into thick mud. Cars sank axle deep. Trucks leaned and slid off the road. Families were left stranded for hours, sometimes overnight, waiting for help that might never come. Except help did come, just not for free. People living along the gap realized something early. Mud meant opportunity. According to multiple accounts, sections of the road were deliberately watered down to make the conditions worse. The deeper the mud, the more travelers got stuck. And once they were stuck, they had no choice but to pay to be pulled out. It became a system, predictable, profitable. Eventually, Route 66 was rerouted in the 1930s to avoid the gap entirely. And just like that, the business disappeared. Most places on this list were killed by the interstate. Jericho Gap was different. It didn't just fade away. It pushed people away, one muddy mile at a time. ALANREED, Texas. ALANREED was the last safe stop before Jericho Gap. If you were smart, you stopped here. You fueled up. You ate. And you prepared yourself for miles of mud and the people waiting to profit from it. That role gave ALANREED a steady economy for decades. Travelers needed it. And as long as the road forced them through, the town had a reason to exist. It became home to the oldest church and the oldest cemetery along Route 66 in Texas, quiet landmarks of a place that once mattered. Then Interstate 40 arrived. In the early 1980s, the highway was completed just 1 mile east of ALANREED. 1 mile. Stand on the town's main street and you can still hear the trucks. On a quiet night, you can see the headlights moving in the distance. The interstate is right there, close enough to see, but never close enough to save the town. There is no exit, no off-ramp, no sign that tells anyone ALANREED is just over the rise. Only a small number of residents remain. A few homes, a few buildings still holding on. A mile is nothing on an interstate. For ALANREED, it was everything. TEXOLA, Oklahoma. TEXOLA sits on the Oklahoma-Texas border, and that border did not sit still. Over the years, the line between the two states shifted again and again through disputes, surveys, and legal battles. For the people living here, that meant something strange. You could go to sleep in one state and wake up in another, without ever moving. The house stayed the same, only the border changed. At its peak, TEXOLA had nearly 800 residents. It was a functioning town built around Route 66, with businesses that depended on the steady flow of travelers passing through. The Magnolia Service Station, built in 1930, still stands today. One of the best preserved Route 66 gas stations in the country, now listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Today, only a small number of residents remain. A few homes, a quiet main street, buildings that outlasted the traffic that once gave them purpose. On the side of an old diner, someone painted the words, "There's no place like TEXOLA." And that may be true, just not in the way they meant it. How do you preserve a town when even the border cannot decide where it belongs? DEPEW, Oklahoma. After so many towns that lost the fight, DEPEW is still in it. The oil boom brought thousands here in the early 20th century. Route 66 brought travelers. DEPEW grew into a real town, with real commerce, a brick main street, churches, schools, a sense of permanence built on the belief that this place would last. Then the oil ran out, and Route 66 was decommissioned, 2 pillars, both gone. Most towns didn't survive that. DEPEW almost didn't either. The population dropped sharply, falling to only a few hundred people. By any measure, it was a devastating decline. But the town didn't empty. The schools stayed open. The churches still held services. The brick storefronts, built in an era when towns were meant to endure, are still standing. Walk through DEPEW today and you'll notice something different. A mowed lawn, a porch light left on, a truck in a driveway. Small signs, but undeniable. DEPEW isn't thriving, but it's still here, still breathing. And after so many places where silence has taken over, that quiet persistence feels almost defiant. Times Beach, Missouri. About 20 miles west of St. Louis, on the banks of the Merrimack River. It was an ordinary place. Affordable homes, working families, a quiet stretch of Route 66 running through town. In the early 1970s, there was a simple problem. Dust. Unpaved roads kicking it into the air. The solution seemed easy. Waste oil sprayed onto the streets to keep the dust down. It worked. The dust settled. But the oil was not just oil. It was contaminated with dioxin, one of the most toxic chemicals ever produced, the same family of chemicals found in Agent Orange. For years, it was sprayed across the town, on roads, on yards, in places where children played and families lived. Nobody knew. Then, in the early 1980s, the soil was tested. The results were staggering, contamination levels far beyond what was considered safe. Soon after, the river flooded. The water carried the toxin through the entire town, into homes, into basements, into the ground itself. The decision came quickly. Times Beach was uninhabitable. Every family was relocated, every building was demolished, the town was erased. Today, the land is a state park. Trees, trails, open space. No signs of what was here, no marker, no names, just silence. Most towns on this list were left behind. Times Beach was buried.